In the heart of Banana Island, where glass walls shimmer like secrets and silence has its own mansion, lives a billionaire no one dares to approach. His name is Zion Orakwue, ruthless tech king, ghost of Lagos high society, and a man whose eyes once held the storm of love until betrayal extinguished them. For 5 long years, Zion has lived in a prison of his own making. Not bars, not walls, but memories. Memories of the woman who broke him, of a scandal that shattered his name, and a grief so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. He speaks to no one. He trusts no one. He feels nothing. Until her. One rainy night, lightning flashes over his estate, and a broken girl is found slumped by his perimeter wall, bleeding, barefoot, nameless. Something about her face stops his breath. Something about her voice, when she finally speaks, threatens to bring back everything he buried. He should have called the police. He should have let her go. Instead, he locks her in, not to hurt her, but to forget. He doesn't know yet. The girl he's trying to erase his past with will be the one to rewrite his future. But when love grows inside captivity, when truth is buried beneath marble floors, and when the face of your savior looks just like your destroyer, how do you tell the difference between punishment and redemption? This isn't just a story about a maid and a billionaire. This is a story of grief, obsession, redemption, and a love so unexpected it shakes the foundation of power itself. In the heart of Banana Island, where billionaires build their fortresses like gods behind gates of glass and marble, there stood a mansion so silent, so untouched by time, it felt less like a home and more like a tomb. The locals called it the House of Ghosts. But inside there were no ghosts, only one man, alive but barely breathing. His name was Zion Orakwue. At 37, Zion had climbed the apex of Nigerian wealth, a digital emperor whose crypto banking empire had morphed into a tech behemoth. He was the founder and CEO of Orakwue Dynamics, a company so dominant in the tech scene that government contracts, international investors, and Silicon Valley billionaires fought for his attention. But none ever truly saw him. Zion was a myth in flesh, cold, sharp-jawed, handsome in the way ice is beautiful and unreachable. 5 years earlier, his name had burned through every headline. A scandal, a betrayal, a death. His wife, Kioma, had died after an explosive affair with Zion's closest friend and co-founder. The fallout had almost destroyed his company. But what it didn't destroy, it froze, including Zion's heart. His mansion, a vast glass and marble monument overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, was pristine, automated, and sterile. There were no paintings on the walls, no music in the halls. The staff were minimal, paid well to be invisible. Food appeared, rooms cleaned themselves through rotating shifts, and every surface gleamed like no one lived there at all. Zion moved in silence, always in black, his presence like a shadow. No one was allowed to speak to him directly, not even his PA. Everything came through voice commands, secure terminals, or cold, typed instructions. Human contact was avoided at all costs. To the world, Zion Orakwue was power incarnate. But inside those cold walls, he was drowning in memory. Then came the rain. It was a night Lagos trembled. Lightning cracked the sky open, and the heavens poured down like punishment. Zion was working late in his underground lab, testing an early version of a biometric AI algorithm, when his head of security pinged him. "Sir, there's a situation near the southern wall." Zion almost ignored it. He didn't concern himself with outside problems. But something about the tone made him pause. He pulled up the security feed. At the edge of his property, curled in the mud like a broken doll, was a girl, barefoot, blood on her arm, her clothes torn, her face hidden beneath wet braids. The rain soaked her to the bone, but she didn't move. She wasn't dead. Not yet. "Probably a setup," one guard said. "Could be bait for robbery. Let's call the police." But Zion didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the screen. Something in her posture, fragile but stubborn, twisted something inside him he thought he had burned away years ago. He stared longer. Then he did something no one expected. He whispered, "Bring her in." The guards hesitated. Now. The girl was lifted gently, despite their confusion, and carried inside. Zion didn't meet them. He didn't allow her to be taken to the guest wing. Instead, he ordered one of the upstairs bedrooms to be prepared, a room that hadn't been used in years. Clean sheets, hot water, medical attention, and a lock on the outside. She was unconscious, bruised, breathing shallow, but alive. When the doctor asked for consent, Zion only nodded once. "Do what's necessary, then leave." He gave no explanation. He told no one who she was or why she was there, not even himself. When the doctor left, Zion stood in the doorway for a long moment, his hand gripping the knob so tightly the veins in his wrist bulged. Then he stepped inside. Not too close, just enough to see her face clearly in the moonlight. And there it was. That face. That face that nearly destroyed him once. That face he'd buried with his wife. He turned sharply and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft, mechanical click. The lock slid in place. She was now his prisoner. And he didn't even know her name. But as he watched her sleep later through the security monitor, her chest rising and falling gently beneath the blanket he'd personally selected, something dark and terrifying began to uncoil in Zion's chest. She looked just like someone he had spent 5 years trying to forget. Zion watches her sleep through the security monitor. She looks just like someone he was trying to forget. She woke with the scent of lavender in her nostrils and the softness of silk beneath her back. For a fleeting second, Amaechi Ezeokoli thought she had died. The ceiling above her was high, white, and smooth, framed by sculpted lights that dimmed to her movement. There was no sound, only the faint hum of hidden air conditioning, whispering like ghosts. Then her body reminded her. The pain in her ribs, the bruises on her arms, the sharp memory of running barefoot through puddles, dodging a black car she could not outrun, screaming into empty streets. Her heart kicked against her chest like a warning drum. She sat up. The room was beautiful, but wrong. White drapes, a wide bed, no mirrors, no phone, no TV, no windows that opened. She rose shakily and limped to the door. It opened from the outside only. Panic bloomed in her chest. She was trapped. It took a day before she saw his face. Until then, everything arrived without touch. Breakfast on a silver tray, delivered through a panel that locked immediately after. A set of clean clothes, a first aid kit, a stack of novels, Achebe, Adichie, Soyinka, and one unfamiliar title, Letters from the Edge of Grief. There was no note, no explanation. On the second night, the door opened. He stood there like a shadow cast in marble, tall, dark, dressed in a black caftan that fell perfectly over broad shoulders. Zion Orakwue stepped into her room like a man entering a vault. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Amaechi was too stunned to speak. He looked like power had been poured into flesh. But his eyes were wrong, like he wasn't seeing her, like he was looking through her at a memory. "Do you remember me?" he asked. His voice was smooth, but cold enough to make her flinch. She blinked. "No, I've never met you before." He studied her as if her words disappointed him, or confirmed something terrible. He said nothing else, just stared. "I need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, I don't belong here." His jaw tightened. "No, not yet. Why are you keeping me here?" Silence. "I won't tell anyone. I don't even know where this place is. He turned and walked out before she could finish. The door closed behind him. She heard the lock slide. Amaechi fell back onto the bed, her hands shaking. It wasn't the kind of prison with bars, but it was a prison nonetheless. She told herself she'd fight, that she would scream, protest, resist. But days passed, and Zion never returned. Only more books. A note appeared once, typed in crisp black font. "Are you eating?" She began to leave notes beneath the door, scribbled on the backs of old novels, desperate, angry, pleading. "Why me? Who are you? What do you want from me? You saved me, then caged me. Why? She received no answers, but the notes kept disappearing. One morning, there was a new item among the deliveries, a violin she hadn't played in years. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Amaechi saw glimpses of opulence, pools, polished hallways, a private cinema, walls of glass, servants who never looked up. How did she end up here? Just a week ago, she had been hiding in a backroom flat in Iyana Oworo, escaping a man who promised her marriage and almost sold her to a trafficker. She had run to Lagos with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. Now she was inside the fortress of a ghost billionaire who looked at her like she was someone else. It was the seventh night when the door opened again. Zion stepped in, but slower this time. He didn't wear black. He wore a soft blue shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, exposing veins and scars. Amaechi stood from the desk, where she'd been journaling. She didn't speak. He held a yellowed envelope in one hand. It trembled. "I want you to read this," he said, almost whispering. He placed it gently on the bed. Their eyes met. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. "What is it?" she asked. He stared at the letter like it was a bomb. "It's from someone I buried." Amaechi picked it up. Across the front, in fading ink, were the words, "To my love, in case I never see you again. Kioma." One night, Zion enters her room, not as a captor, but with a trembling voice. He asks her to read something. It's a letter from his late wife. Zion Orakwue had designed his world to keep ghosts out. Every corridor in his mansion, every piece of furniture, every white wall, every stainless steel appliance. It was all curated for control. No memory could survive in such a sterile space. That was the plan. Until she arrived. Amaechi's presence infected everything. She didn't scream anymore. She didn't ask to be released. Instead, she moved through her confined world with a quiet defiance, reshaping it with each breath. Zion told himself she was just a temporary disruption, a resemblance he'd misread in a moment of weakness. But it was a lie. She was everywhere. Her laughter, soft, reluctant, echoed through the hallway when she read something funny in one of the books. Her voice, curious, stubborn, came through the door when she practiced reading his late wife's letter aloud. And her face, her God-forsaken face, invaded his every waking moment. Because she didn't just look like Kioma, she was Kioma, or rather, the version of Kioma that still lived inside him, the one he hadn't been able to bury. 5 years earlier, Zion had been standing on the balcony of his penthouse on Victoria Island, hands trembling as Kioma screamed at him from inside. "You think I was with him for fun? You abandoned me, Zion. You were married to your company, not to me." Her tears had cut through her mascara. He remembered thinking how beautiful she still looked, even while breaking his world apart. "You slept with Say, my best friend." His voice was cold, dead. "You stopped touching me 2 years ago." He hadn't known what to say, and so she had left. 2 weeks later, she was dead. The official story said she slipped from the 23rd floor balcony, but Zion never believed that. He knew Kioma didn't slip. She jumped, and he hadn't cried at her funeral. Instead, he fired Say, sold their shared assets, buried the scandal in NDAs and legal threats, and disappeared into the marble tomb he now called home. Until Amaechi. She was everything Kioma had been, and wasn't. Her questions were innocent, but razor-sharp. Her defiance didn't come from manipulation, but moral clarity. She didn't want anything from him, not his money, not his attention. She only wanted answers, and somehow that made her more dangerous than any boardroom rival. Zion began changing things without realizing it. The lighting in her room was softened. The walls were painted a pale gold. More books arrived, modern titles, poetry, a sketchpad. A record player was installed one afternoon. The violin she had once ignored began appearing on the desk, freshly tuned. He didn't speak to her often, but he watched her from the hidden monitors, tortured by the way she hummed, by how her hair curled behind her ear, by how she would close her eyes when listening to Nina Simone. One night, she played the violin, slowly, clumsily at first, Then, with rising confidence, the melody filled the hallway like a song from a dream Zion thought he'd lost. He stood in the dark, just beyond the hallway corner, unable to move. The next day she cornered him in the corridor outside her door. No guards, just them. "Why are you keeping me here?" Zion couldn't lie. Not anymore. "Because I need to forget her," he said, voice brittle. "But you won't let me?" Her eyes searched his. But he walked away before she could answer. Amaechi waited until the house was asleep. Then she explored the edges of her prison, not to escape, but to understand. There were no cameras in the East Wing, just dusty storage rooms and old locked doors. She tried one handle. It opened. Inside, the air smelled of old perfume. This room hadn't been touched in years. She could feel it. A jewelry box sat on a wooden dresser. A scarf hung from the bedpost, and on the side table, buried beneath a cracked frame, was a photograph. Amaechi gasped. The woman in the picture wore a wedding gown. Her eyes sparkled. Her lips curled in mischief. Her beauty was haunting. She looked exactly like Amaechi. Not similar. Identical. Amaechi held the photo close, her hands shaking. Who was she? And why had Zion locked her in this house like a shadow of someone else? Amaechi finds an old photo of Kioma in a hidden drawer and sees the uncanny resemblance. The lock clicked one morning. Not loudly, not with ceremony. It was quiet, too quiet for what it meant. When Amaechi opened her eyes and touched the door handle, it turned freely. She stepped out into a hallway of polished marble, walls gleaming under automated lights, cameras shifting quietly with every movement. She wasn't free, not truly, but the prison had grown wider. Zion left no note, no instructions, just access to the east and west wings, the kitchen, the library, the gardens. A digital map blinked on a tablet near her door with green-lit zones. She was no longer a prisoner. Now, she was something else. A maid behind glass walls. She began cleaning out of instinct. Not because anyone asked, but because she needed to move, to reclaim control. Her hands danced over counters, wiped windows, adjusted pillows that didn't need adjusting. The house, immaculate, automated, soulless, responded to her with silence. She cooked sometimes too. Not for Zion, for herself. Jollof rice, plantain, okra soup. The scent floated through corridors like memories. Zion never approached when she cooked, but she always noticed an empty plate on the tray the next morning. She wandered carefully, absorbing everything, the texture of silence, the soft hum of distant servers, the way Zion's footsteps were never heard but always felt. The mansion had no photos, no family mementos, nothing to suggest a man lived here, except for the library and the office at the center of the home. He began inviting her into the library, first to return books, then to discuss them. One afternoon, after she left a handwritten list of her favorite passages from Half of a Yellow Sun, she found a note on her pillow. "What did you think of Richard's silence in the end?" It was the first note he had ever written her. She replied on the same page. "Sometimes silence is a form of violence." From there, they spoke more, carefully, cautiously, like two people passing secrets under a locked door. He asked about music. She introduced him to Asa and Johnny Drill. He showed her Rachmaninoff and Debussy. One evening, he asked what she thought about artificial empathy in AI development. She challenged him. If machines mimic emotions without feeling them, are we still calling that intelligence, or just manipulation? He blinked at her, then smiled, barely. At night, she wrote again. Poetry, notes, her thoughts. She didn't know that Zion read them. He had access to everything. The journals she left open, the files on the tablet, even the voice recordings when she thought she was alone. He didn't read them to control her. He read them because they reminded him what it meant to feel. Her writing was raw, personal, sometimes angry, sometimes achingly beautiful. One entry read, "This house is not a mansion. It's a memory suspended in glass. And I am its breath." He read it 4 times. Then he left a rose on her tray the next morning. Amaechi never asked again why she was there. Instead, She watched him closely. She learned that Zion hated interruptions during coding hours, that he only drank room temperature water, that he played chess against an AI every Thursday night and lost deliberately. One day, she found a small bottle of medication on the kitchen counter. The label was faint. Alprazolam. Zion suffered panic attacks. She filed it away quietly. They began having long debates. He invited her into his office, a dark, modern space filled with screens and sleek technology. She hesitated at first. It was his sanctuary, but he waved her in with a nod. They discussed politics, philosophy, morality. "You think too much like a poet," he said once. She replied, "You think too little like a man." He stared at her for a long time, then said, "That's the first honest insult I've heard in years." She smiled, and he didn't stop her. That night, he stood outside her door. "I've unlocked it," he said, his voice muffled by the wood. "You're free to go." Amaechi didn't move. Then his voice softened. "Or, you can stay and learn the truth." Zion finally unlocks her bedroom door, but says, "You can leave, or you can stay and learn the truth." The door remained open for 3 days. Amaechi stood before it each morning, contemplating the threshold between captivity and freedom. But even freedom, she'd learned, was not always physical. She had been running for years, first from the man who promised love and delivered nightmares, then from poverty, shame, and now from a reflection in Zion's eyes that showed her a self she didn't recognize. Still, she stayed, not for comfort, not for safety, for truth. On the 4th night, Zion came to her room, sat on the floor near her bed like a man shedding armor, and told her everything. His voice was low, almost clinical at first, as he recounted the beginning. How he met Kioma at a fintech panel in Abuja, how she laughed at his seriousness, how she became the only thing in his world that didn't come with terms and conditions. They married quickly, too quickly. Then came the betrayal. Kioma and Say, Zion's co-founder and best friend. A drunken night turned into an affair. Then lies, then confrontation, then screaming. Zion had watched the security footage of their argument 100 times, trying to catch the moment it all shattered. He never saw it. He only remembered the call. Kioma's body was found at the foot of their penthouse. No note, no goodbye. He had tried to jump 2 days later. Amaechi's breath caught when he rolled up his sleeve and showed her the scar on his left wrist. Pale, thin, almost hidden. "No one knows," he said, "not even the tabloids." She sat beside him slowly, silence stretching like a bandage between them. "I buried her 3 times," he whispered, "first in the ground, then in memory, and then in you." Amaechi didn't speak. She just reached for his hand and held it. It was the first time he let her. The next morning, a server crashed in Zion's East Wing, one of the biometric facial recognition units. Amaechi, now free to roam more deeply into the tech-laced heart of the mansion, found herself standing in front of a humming tower of code and flickering lights. "What are you doing?" Zion asked sharply, stepping into the room. She didn't flinch. "Your server's caught in a loop, probably a memory overflow." Zion raised an eyebrow. "And you know that how?" She didn't answer, just moved to the terminal and tapped a string of code. Within seconds, the screen stabilized. Zion stared. "Where did you learn that?" Amaechi shrugged. "I was studying computer science. Until life." He didn't ask more. He didn't have to. Later that day, he left a full scholarship contract on her desk, sponsored by Orakwue Dynamics, with a paid internship built in. She ignored it. When he found her reading by the pool, she looked up calmly. "Don't buy your guilt. Just tell me what you really want." Their eyes locked. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the captor. She was no longer the broken girl. They were 2 souls sitting in the ruins of their own pasts, quietly deciding whether they deserved to rise from it. One night, the tension snapped. It was raining again, softly this time, a drizzle tapping against the glass. Amaechi had just finished playing the violin in the music room when Zion walked in, shirt unbuttoned at the top, eyes weary. He didn't speak. She didn't either. They stood in the quiet for a long, pulsing moment. Then she stepped toward him, slowly, deliberately. She kissed him. It was not a desperate kiss, or a romantic fairy tale kiss. It was a kiss full of questions, of grief, of hunger, of what if. Zion didn't move at first. Then he pulled away, gently, but firmly. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. "If I fall for you, I will lose everything again." Amaechi swallowed, hurt rising in her throat. "And if you don't, what will you keep? Your silence?" He left the room without answering. Hours later, she wandered the halls, restless. She couldn't sleep. She passed his door, stopped. Then she entered. Not to seduce, not to argue, just to be. She sat in his chair, touched the glass sculpture on his desk, ran her fingers over the printed photo of him with his parents, one of the few he kept. She whispered, "I don't look like her when I'm alone." And then she walked out, barefoot, silent. What she didn't know was that her image was being watched on a screen far away, deep in a hidden surveillance hub. Someone else was watching. Someone who wasn't Zion. Amaechi is caught on security footage leaving his room at night, and someone else is watching. For the first time in years, Zion's empire began to shake. The silence that once protected him turned against him, echoing with the hum of chaos he could not control. It started small. A corrupted server, then a data breach. And finally, a full-scale cyber attack that crippled Orakwue dynamics overnight. Millions of naira vanished. Shareholders demanded explanations. The media swarmed like vultures. In the boardroom, Zion stared at the flickering screens as lines of red text streamed across his system monitors. Someone was inside his firewalls. Someone who knew exactly where to strike. The name appeared in a single message that blinked across his main terminal. "You took everything from me. Now I take her." S.O. Zion's blood turned cold. Seye Ogundele, the ghost of his past, had come back, hungrier than ever. Amaechi heard the shouting from the east wing, the first real noise she'd ever heard in the mansion. Zion's usually composed voice was sharp, laced with panic. She found him pacing his office, sleeves rolled, eyes bloodshot. "What's happening?" she asked. He froze when he saw her, as if her presence was suddenly dangerous. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said too quickly. But Amaechi was not the same girl he'd locked up months ago. "You're lying. Tell me." Before he could answer, his assistant, Ngozi, burst in holding a tablet. "Sir, these images are everywhere. Twitter, tech blogs, even gossip sites." She turned the screen toward him. It was Amaechi. Photos of her entering the mansion, walking through his hallways, standing beside him in blurred security footage. But the captions twisted everything. "The billionaire's new mistress." Who is Amaechi Ezeokoli? Ex-con or con artist? Zion Orakwue's mysterious captive lover, planted spy? Seye had struck where it hurt most, not Zion's company, but his already fragile heart. Amaechi stared at the screen in disbelief, then at Zion. "Is that what they think I am? Is that what you think I am?" Zion's throat tightened. He didn't answer quickly enough. That silence destroyed something between them. Amaechi's voice trembled. "You could have denied it. You could have said one word." Zion's lips parted, but no sound came. The ghost of Kioma lingered behind every syllable. He had been fooled once before, by love that turned to betrayal, and now the fear chained his tongue. Amaechi turned away. She locked herself in her room for hours, ignoring the knocks, the apologies that came too late. She didn't cry. She had no tears left for men who doubted her worth. That night, she packed a single bag, folded her poems, and slipped a note under Zion's door. "You saved me once. You can't keep saving a ghost." Before dawn, she stepped into the courtyard, ready to vanish quietly from the mansion of silence. She never made it to the gate. When Zion woke, he sensed it immediately. The stillness had changed. The house felt hollow. Her room was empty. The note lay on the floor, like a death sentence. His phone buzzed once. An unknown number? He opened it. A video played. Grainy, dark, trembling. Amaechi was tied to a chair. A bruise bloomed along her jaw. Her eyes were swollen, terrified. Behind her, a voice said, "You took my company, my name, my life. Now I take yours." Amaechi looked straight into the camera, lips trembling. "Zion," she whispered. "Please, don't let him win." Then the screen went black. A video is sent to Zion. Amaechi is tied up, bruised, and whispering his name. Zion Orakwue had buried his demons beneath marble, silence, and algorithms. But when he saw Amaechi bound and bruised on that screen, something ancient and unholy ripped its way to the surface. The man the world knew, calm, clinical, billionaire genius, died in that moment. In his place rose a predator. Within minutes, Zion activated the dormant layers of his private surveillance grid. Drones launched from the roof. Satellite pings were traced through military-grade hacking software, rigged by engineers he paid under the table. He didn't call the police. He didn't consult his board. He hunted. Amaechi's GPS signature blinked in a secluded property off the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, an abandoned estate once owned by Say's cousin. The location was unguarded by logic, but laced with heat signatures. Zion loaded a firearm from his hidden vault, a relic from his father's collection, and drove himself. By the time he arrived, rage was his only language. The front doors were already ajar. Inside, shadows moved. Zion didn't hesitate. He moved through the corridors like he knew them, dodging traps, ignoring warnings. Then a man emerged, armed, broad-shouldered, and not expecting a tech billionaire to pull the trigger first. But Zion did. The shot echoed like thunder across the empty estate. The bodyguard dropped, blood blooming on white tiles. Zion didn't blink. He found Amaechi tied to a chair in the main hall, lips cracked, eyes wild with fear. She gasped when she saw him, but before she could speak, Say stepped into the light behind her, clapping slowly. "I should have finished her," he spat. Zion raised the gun. "Step away." Saya smirked. "She's not her, you know, no matter how much you want her to be." Zion fired again. This time, he missed intentionally, grazing Say's shoulder. The man screamed, staggered back. Zion untied Amaechi with shaking hands, lifting her gently, cradling her like she was made of paper. Amaechi didn't say a word. But she didn't stop trembling either. Back at the mansion, the world spun faster than they could process. News leaked of Zion's private assault. A police inquiry began. Social media ignited with theories, praise, and condemnation. Zion the Avenger trended in Nigeria. The next morning, a press statement was released. Amaechi Ezeokoli is a member of my household. Any harm against her is harm against me. Zion Orakwue. The statement exploded online. But inside the mansion, silence reigned. Amaechi didn't speak to him. She barely touched her food. She moved like a shell, broken by more than fear, broken by the man who claimed to save her with hands that had now taken a life. Zion watched her through the glass walls, but didn't know how to bridge the space between them. Was it safety she needed, or freedom? He offered both, but said neither. Amaechi began plotting. She waited until he was asleep. She watched the guards, memorized their routes. She timed the hallway cameras, and then, at midnight, she was gone. Zion awoke to emptiness, and a single envelope on the grand piano. Inside was a handwritten letter. "You brought me into your world to forget her, but I am not her. I am me, and I cannot live inside your grief any longer. You must learn to let go." At midnight, Amaechi vanishes and leaves behind a letter saying, "You must learn to let go." The mansion was never loud, but after Amaechi left, it became empty, the kind of emptiness that echoed louder than any scream. Zion walked its hallways like a man trapped in his own mausoleum. Every room whispered her name. The music room was silent, violin untouched. Her bedroom remained untouched, sheets still folded, a book left open on the windowsill. He found a single strand of her hair on the couch and stared at it like it was the last thread tying him to reality. For days, he didn't eat, didn't code, didn't speak. Then came the rage. He fired 2 staff members for whispering in the hallway. He threw a glass at a board meeting when someone mentioned quarterly losses. He ignored investor calls. The stock price dipped. Rumors swirled. Zion Orakwue, the man who once ruled with silence and steel, was unraveling. The board called an emergency meeting. "Step back," they told him. "Take a leave." He didn't argue. Instead, he did something no one expected. He walked into a private therapist's office in Victoria Island and sat down without a word. The therapist, an older woman with soft eyes and decades of silence behind her, waited. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I never buried her properly." "Kioma?" the therapist asked gently. He nodded. "She died. Then my name died. Then I tried to die. And when Amaechi showed up, I thought God had returned what was taken. But it wasn't her. It was never her." He paused, eyes distant. "I didn't love Amaechi. I needed her. And I called that love. And now," he swallowed, "now I'm learning how to mourn both of them." In Ikoyi, Amaechi wiped down tables at a modest restaurant tucked between a barber shop and a betting kiosk. It was far from Banana Island, but it was safe. She worked the morning shifts, kept her head down, and counted her tips at night with quiet pride. She had no idea who she was becoming, only that she wasn't someone's prisoner anymore. Her dreams still shook with flashbacks, of rope against her wrists, of Zion's cold gaze, of the kiss they never spoke of again. But each morning she stood up straighter. Sometimes she saw his face on TV screens, reports about his company's slide, his absence from the tech world. A new documentary called him the Ghost Tycoon. She watched in silence. Then one afternoon, while pouring gory into a takeaway bowl, she looked up, and there he was, standing outside the restaurant's glass wall, arms crossed, no bodyguards, no car, just Zion staring at her, with an expression she couldn't read. Pity, longing, regret. She froze. Their eyes locked. She didn't move. He didn't blink. Seconds passed, like centuries. Then she turned away, handed the bowl to a customer, and disappeared into the backroom. When she came out again, he was gone. But something was waiting on the counter, a simple white envelope. Inside, written in his now familiar sharp handwriting, "I don't want to rescue you. I want to understand you. When you're ready to speak, I'll be here, always." He leaves behind a note that reads, "When you're ready to speak, I'll be here, always." Would you like me to proceed with heading 9? A woman who rose. Amaechi Ezeokoli had once been a girl in chains, silent, bruised, defined by the shadows of men who thought they could own her. But now, months after she walked away from the mansion, she stood in the morning light with her back straight, and her name no longer whispered, but spoken. Her journey back to herself began quietly. A surprise envelope arrived at the restaurant one afternoon. Inside was a scholarship offer, full tuition, living stipend, access to private mentorship. There was no name, no signature. Just the emblem of a top private university and one word typed in the corner: Rise. She didn't need a signature. She knew who sent it. For a moment, pride almost made her reject it. But Amaechi had learned that healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was accepting help without surrendering power. So she enrolled, returning to the university that once betrayed her. This time, she didn't go to hide. She went to conquer. Flashbacks came in waves as she walked the campus halls. Memories of the girl she used to be. The one with braids and bright eyes, dreams bigger than her wallet. The one who lost her scholarship when she refused a professor's disgusting offer. The one who had walked out of the dean's office shaking with rage and shame, while her mother lay in a rural clinic, waiting for insulin they couldn't afford. But that girl hadn't died. She had just been buried beneath trauma, and now she was digging herself free. Within months, Amaechi began freelancing. At first, It was minor code cleanups, data bug fixes, firewall sweeps for Lagos businesses. But her reputation grew fast. She had a gift, not just for tech, but for solving problems under pressure. She stayed low profile, no interviews, no selfies. But behind the scenes, she became the go-to fixer for politicians, small startups, and high-level security breaches. And Zion Orakwue watched her rise. He didn't speak to her, never showed his face. But behind every contract she received, there was a subtle signature. Anonymous payments to clinics her mother visited, sudden job offers from companies she'd never applied to, doors that opened when others shut. He watched her quietly, not as a guardian, but as a man learning how to let go. One night, a national news station ran a feature titled, "The Women Changing Nigerian Tech." Amaechi was the final spotlight. She wore a blue Ankara blouse, hair natural, voice clear. The interviewer asked, "You've been through so much. Betrayal, captivity, silence. Yet you still speak with grace. How?" She paused. "I don't believe in revenge. I believe in transformation. People don't always know the damage they do, because they're bleeding too. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing peace over pain." She didn't mention Zion. She didn't have to. He watched the segment alone in a hotel room in Marrakesh. When the screen faded to black, his hands were trembling. He had finally made a decision. He was going to leave Nigeria, not to escape, but to start again. As Amaechi's profile grew, so did her strength. She no longer avoided mirrors. She no longer questioned her worth. She was no longer his prisoner, no longer anyone's secret, no longer a woman tethered to a man's regret. She was a name, a voice, a brand. She founded her own firm, EchoLayer, a cybersecurity consultancy for underrepresented startups. Her first staff was all women. Her first policy? No contracts with corporations who couldn't name at least 2 women on their board. She stood alone, and yet she still dreamed of him. Not every night, but often enough to wonder. She saw his face in crowds, heard his voice in random silence, missed things she couldn't explain. The way he stood by the window, the rare smile that seemed like a gift stolen from his grief. The way he once said, "You think too much like a poet." He had hurt her, but he had also awakened her. She didn't know what to do with that truth. Until the night of the Tech Future Awards. She wore a navy gown, hair swept back, lips trembling as she accepted the trophy for Young Innovator of the Year. Flashbulbs flashed, applause thundered. She gave a speech about resilience, then she turned, breath caught, and froze. Zion Orakwue stood in the back row of the audience. No fanfare, no suit, just a quiet presence, watching her, eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before. Peace. At an award ceremony, she turns and finds Zion standing in the audience. 2 years had passed since the last time they shared air, and yet when their eyes met across the ballroom of the Tech Future Awards, it was as if no time had passed at all. Zion didn't move when she spotted him. He stood there quietly, arms folded, hair flecked with gray at the edges now, but his gaze as intense as ever, except softer, like a storm had passed through him and left only rain behind. Amaechi blinked twice to make sure he wasn't a ghost. Later that evening, after the ceremony, she found him waiting by the fountain. He didn't speak until she stopped in front of him, close enough to hear his breath. "I wasn't sure you'd still want to see me," he said. She studied him. "I wasn't sure either." They didn't hug. They didn't touch. Instead, they walked out of the venue into the Lagos night until their footsteps echoed along the marble paths of Eco-Atlantic, with the ocean whispering to their right. For a long time there was only silence between them. Then Zion spoke. "I was wrong to keep you, but you were right to stay. You changed me, Amaechi." She stopped, looked at him. "Why now? Why come here?" He turned, jaw clenched. "Because I've carried you in every decision since you left. And I realized I never really said the words." Amaechi crossed her arms. Her voice was steady. "You kept me locked away, Zion. Treated me like a memory you were too afraid to face. Do you even understand what that did to me?" His eyes darkened with shame. "Yes, I do now." She shook her head. "No, you understand you now. But do you understand me?" "I want to," he whispered. They stood in silence again, the waves crashing like a slow heartbeat behind them. The next day, Zion drove her in silence to a quiet cemetery on the mainland, where the gravestone read Kioma o Orakwue, beloved, misunderstood, free. Amaechi stood in front of the grave, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "I'm not her," she whispered, "but I see her in you." Zion knelt beside the grave. For the first time he spoke about her, not as a wife or a betrayal, but as a woman he failed to understand. "I pushed her away, just like I tried to own you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself from grief." He looked up at Amaechi. "I was emotionally abusive, not with my hands, but with silence, with control." She dropped to her knees beside him, trembling. "I cry for her," she said, voice breaking. "I cry for you. And I cry for the version of us that could have existed, if we had met whole." He turned his hand slowly, offering his palm. She took it, not because it solved anything, but because it was real. They left the grave together, hands tangled, no words. Neither one knew what the future held. But for the first time, they weren't walking in grief. They were walking beside it. As they reached the car, Zion paused. "If I asked you to forgive me," he said softly, "could you?" Amaechi turned to him, eyes wet, but fierce. "Forgiveness is not love," she said, "but love can't exist without it." And with that, they held hands. Not as captor and captive, not as savior and victim, but as two people trying to build something true from the ruins. The next morning, just as Zion poured coffee into a ceramic cup in his apartment, his phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He answered, expecting nothing. "Mr. Orakwue," a firm voice said, "this is the Financial Intelligence Unit. We need to speak with you urgently. There's an ongoing investigation into international wire transfers and intellectual property theft." Zion's brows furrowed. "What does that have to do with me?" The line went quiet. Then the voice said, "It's about your former employee and now associate, Amaechi Ezeokoli. She's been named as a person of interest." Zion receives a call. His company is under legal investigation, and this time, Amaechi is implicated. Love, no matter how deeply rooted, will always be tested. And sometimes, the test doesn't come from outside forces. It comes from the fracture of trust within. Zion stood in front of his boardroom wall, a sleek black screen displaying the unthinkable, dozens of flagged activities tied to one name, Amaechi Ezeokoli, multiple unauthorized logins, access to proprietary AI code, international transfers, traced to shell accounts. All timestamps pointed to her laptop, her apartment, her credentials. The board members were merciless. "We warned you about her, Zion," hissed Mr. Danjuma, the chief legal officer. "She was never qualified. She was a risk." "She's not a risk," Zion said, fists clenched. She's not capable of this." But even as he spoke, a tremor ran through his voice. Doubt. When he confronted Amaechi at her office that evening, the sun hadn't yet set, but her face already looked like dusk, pale, hurt. "They think I did it?" she asked, voice flat. Zion nodded. "Do you think I did it?" His silence was louder than a scream. Amaechi stepped back like she'd been slapped. "You said you knew me. You said you wanted to understand me." "There's too much evidence," he muttered. "Your login, your old laptop, payments." "Are you listening to yourself?" she said, voice cracking. "They framed me. Someone planted all that, and you of all people should have known." Their fragile bond, rebuilt brick by hesitant brick, began to collapse beneath the weight of suspicion. Amaechi left without another word. Zion watched her walk away again, and this time the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like punishment. For 3 days, he spiraled, refused meetings, drank again, searched for a flaw in her story. Then, one sleepless night, he returned to the one place he had avoided. Her journals. The old handwritten ones she left behind when she fled the mansion. Page after page, Amaechi had documented everything. Her thoughts, fears, even notes about suspicious activity during her time as a freelancer. A name stood out, circled in red pen. Obiora Adeyemi, his COO. Zion's heart froze. Obiora had been with him for years, loyal to a fault. But suddenly, the puzzle snapped into place. Obiora had access to her laptop during a company training seminar. He'd even offered to help set up her company email. Zion remembered thinking nothing of it. Within hours, Zion's internal security team uncovered encrypted files hidden in Obiora's system, redirect logs, stolen code snippets, falsified metadata, all designed to point back to Amaechi. And the source? Say's digital signature. Even after death, Say's reach lingered like poison. Zion fired Obiora that night. Pressed. Charges. Cleaned house. But some things could not be repaired so easily. When he arrived at Amaechi's office again, this time he brought no accusations, just truth. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I didn't believe you. I didn't trust what we had." Amaechi looked up from her desk. Her eyes were dry, but her heart was distant. "I know I didn't betray you," she said, "but you betrayed me." Zion's voice broke. "I thought I was protecting the company, but I should have protected you." She stood, walked slowly to him. "You once locked me in your house," she whispered, "then in your heart, then in your fear." He reached for her hand. She didn't take it. "If you loved me," she said, her voice like glass, "you would have believed me first." Then, without another word, she picked up her bag and walked past him. No letter, no explanation. This time, she walked away for real. And Zion didn't stop her. Amaechi walks away. This time, for real. 1 year later, Lagos whispered a different name when it spoke of Zion Orakwue. No longer the myth behind glass walls, or the billionaire who vanished into scandal. He had returned, but smaller, quieter, changed. Orakwue dynamics survived the storm, but it was no longer a kingdom ruled by silence and command. Zion rebuilt it not from the top, but from within, listening, collaborating, surrounding himself with people who challenged him. He stepped down as CEO, became chairman instead, took meetings in cafes, not boardrooms, laughed sometimes. Not the hollow echo of wealth, but the kind of laugh that comes from knowing you've been through fire and didn't burn completely. And the mansion? Gone. He sold it. Now he lived in a modest duplex on the Lekki Peninsula. Glass still, but sunlight-filled, open, with art on the walls and music in the corners. The kind of place where no one needed permission to breathe. A place where memory didn't feel like prison. In a gleaming hotel hall in Dubai, at the International Future Tech Summit, Amaechi Ezeokoli walked across the marble floor with the confidence of someone who no longer apologized for taking up space. Her name flashed on the event schedule. Keynote speaker. Building cybersecurity from the ground up. She had done it, from cleaner to consultant, from fugitive to founder. Her firm, Echo Layer, now had offices in 3 countries and had just inked a major deal with the European Union on digital rights protections. She was her own legacy. She didn't wear fear anymore. So when she turned a corner on the way to the evening gala and saw him, she didn't freeze. Zion stood beside the refreshment table, stirring tea. Slim fit white shirt, no tie, simple, grounded. He looked up, and he smiled. It wasn't wide or dramatic. It was just real. She approached slowly. "Didn't think I'd see you here," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Didn't think you'd talk to me." Amaechi's eyes twinkled. "People change. Some of us take longer," he admitted. They walked into a quiet corner of the hall, away from the noise of tech demos and investor chatter. Their conversation was light at first. Safe, business, travel, new books. But then, Zion said something unexpected. "I bought a new place, smaller. It has a garden." She raised an eyebrow. "You? Plants?" He chuckled. "They die often. But I'm learning." There was a silence. but not a heavy one. It stretched like a bridge being built between them again. "I watched your UN talk," he added. "You said something about safety not being just locks and passwords, but dignity." She looked at him surprised. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything about you," he said simply. She looked away for a second, the moment pressing gently against her chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny envelope. "I wasn't sure I'd see you here, but I carried this just in case." She opened it. Inside was a single tea bag. Her favorite, hibiscus and lemon. Below it, a handwritten note. "Tea? Just tea." She smiled. "Tea sounds good." He nodded. "There's a place down the street. Not fancy. Quiet." As they walked toward the exit, side by side, he stopped just before the doors. "You were never my prisoner," he said softly. "I was yours." Amaechi turned, eyes meeting his. "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we can just walk. No weight, no chain, no past clawing behind them. Just two people walking into the city lights, not as captor and captive, not even as lovers reborn, but as equals, grown, whole, open to what came next, and maybe, just maybe, love again. None. Just peace, growth, and open-ended hope. Some stories don't end with grand declarations or final kisses. Some end in quiet steps, soft glances, and hearts learning how to beat again, not for survival, but for possibility. Zion Orakwue learned that love cannot be controlled, and grief cannot be silenced by glass walls. Amaechi Ezeokoli learned that freedom is not the absence of chains, but the presence of choice. In a world that once caged them both, they chose something braver than revenge or reunion. They chose growth, they chose peace. And beyond the lights of Dubai, beneath the hush of healing footsteps, two broken people walked into a future they no longer feared, together or apart, but never again prisoners of their past.